So let's talk about The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. Now, Lois McMaster Bujold is the joint highest winner in terms of number of wins of the Hugo Award for Best Novel. Tied with Robert Heinlein, she has 4. And maybe I float in the wrong circles, but when I read or watch about fantasy discussion online, about fantasy books, I very rarely hear her name brought up. And that's a shame, because I think she should be discussed more. She's a great writer, and she's still publishing, so there's still more to come. Now, The Curse of Chalion is the first book in the World of Five Gods series, or World, or whatever. It's kind of actually 2 interlinked or multiple interlinked series, complex connections. There's currently 3 novels, there's 9 novellas, and those have been collected into 2 collections so far of 3 novellas each. And this book, Curse of Chalion, was the first of all of that. She's mostly known, by the way, previously for her Vorkosigan saga, which is sci-fi. This was the first of this series of the World of Five Gods series, and it didn't win the Hugo, but it was nominated. Its sequel, Paladin of Souls, did win the Hugo, and because I saw that was highly rated, I ended up buying this one and read it first, obviously. Now, it's set in a version of Fantasy Europe, where the map's flipped upside down, and in this case we are in Fantasy Spain during, I suppose, the era of the Reconquista, and particularly of the late era, where you're talking about different parts of Spain reuniting or uniting into what is now modern Spain. And it's set in a place called Chalion, which is and visits a place called Ibra, which are equivalent to Castile and Aragon, if you are interested at all in your European history. Now, it also has a big thing about religions. It's called the World of Five Gods because the religious aspect of this is one of the most important parts of the world. Basically, the nations we're in here, and many of the nations we visit, but not all, over the course of the many books, worship the 5 gods: the father, mother, son, daughter, and bastard. And they each have different realms and spheres of influence. They have a complex relationship with the world in terms of how they access it and influence it, what their own perspective on time is. They are not a kind of Christian or Muslim high god, nor are they really Olympian gods. They don't live on a particular place, and they are beyond, in most respects, human emotions and temptations, though they do have personalities. A particular thing is they can bless and invest, essentially, people with saintly powers. You know, if you have a particular kind of investment from a god, you're a saint. And that's to give a contrast, those are the 5 gods. The Roknari, who live on the northern coasts, they believe in 4 gods and reject the bastard, because the bastard is allegedly the son of the mother, the mother god, via demons, via the father of demons. And so the bastard has a particular connection to many rejected things like death and magic and demons. So yeah, that's the world, and if that sounds interesting to you, then it should. It's very interesting. The plot is expansive. It's hard to explain without spoiling. She's a twisty-turny writer. I don't mean she has loads of crazy twists. What I mean is there's a certain density to the plot and a certain amount of dependency on what's happening before. When I think about David Gemmell's legend, I can say all these characters go to this doomed battle in this fortress with all these walls, and you know they're going to have to defend each wall as they fall back. And once you know his writing style, you know that characters are dying and everything's at risk. And that's not really a spoiler, you know, in itself. Here, it's very hard to sum it up like that. But basically, here is the basic plot. Cazaril is a Chalionese nobleman, but he's actually been a galley slave for some years, and he's now come back home. He's old and battered. He thinks he's past it. He just wants some kind of service, and he ends up going to his old patroness, the Dowager Duchess of Valenda, I think, or of wherever she's from, but I think in the city of Valenda. And she is actually hosting her daughter at the time, who is the queen, who's apparently a bit mad, and there are her children are with her, and the lady's maid as well, the princess's maid. And Cazaril ends up becoming the tutor to the princess, but this catches him in the curse of Chalion, this strange curse of some kind that is on the royal family. No one really knows why. It has to be investigated. And you can see there's magic involved, there's these gods involved. And Cazaril, basically, he ends up engaging with strange magics, with plots, with all the different political factions that are playing with the realm. So this is a very, very good book. I wouldn't really mark any notable weaknesses when I think about it. I don't think all of her writing is equally amazing, though I've enjoyed everything I've read by her. But this book and Paladin of Souls as well are just so good. So I wouldn't complain about anything really. I'm sure if I really racked my mind I could, but I can't think of anything. But big strengths. Well, I do think the plot is good. I think it's interesting and never predictable and always willing to go in a new direction, but also quite naturalistic in terms of character behaviour. We'll touch on characters in a moment, but that means that things fit together, people act in a way that's compelling, their acts and deeds, therefore, their effect on the plot is compelling on the whole. And I think that's fun. And I think the politics she does very well as part of the plot, and she always does politics very well. I think the setting and world building is exceptionally good. It is just fantasy Europe, but it's one of the best fantasy Europes. I feel like I should do a video on fantasy Europes and how they differ so much and how different authors approach them, having been reading Conan lately. But here the fantasy Europe is quite compelling and dense and layered. The setting's rich and evocative. She's always good at describing different settings. She's written stuff from fantasy Greece to fantasy Spain, but also fantasy Switzerland, fantasy Germany. So she's written a fairly wide range of places, and it's always evocative, always rich, good description. And particularly the main religious system is very good and very interesting. It's a soft magic system, if you like, if you want to use that language. She doesn't do a Brandon Sanderson on the magic, but she does do a bit of a Brandon Sanderson on the religion. That is to say that it becomes apparent that there are rules. It's a hybrid, but the detail and the rules go into the religion and the way in which people interact with it, and the way in which exceptions are discovered and new ways of doing things are discovered. And that's rare. I can't think of many fantasy authors who think a lot about religion. Terry Pratchett a bit in a very different way, and maybe a few other authors who, George R.R. Martin kind of flirts with it, but not very much. You get the idea. Actually, someone who certainly does is Orson Scott Card. Brandon Sanderson's religions are much less significant in comparison to his magic systems. Here, the magic system is much less significant compared to the religious superstructure. The characters are also very good. They're well drawn and compelling. No major character is one note. To give an example, King Orico and the Chancellor Martu de Gironal are both characters who influence the plot, and are plot characters therefore, but are not main characters. They're not in the middle of the point of view. They're not given much space on screen, and that's okay. Every book of this kind of style and length has characters who influence events despite not being on screen a lot. A really obvious example would be Dumbledore, actually. Sometimes you might even say Gandalf flirts with that, but he is on screen more in Lord of the Rings particularly. But the idea you have characters who influence stuff, whether they are mentors or villains, or the king who's supporting your quest and has sent you somewhere or something like that. So Martu de Gironal, King Orico, plot characters, not development characters, really. But they are both nuanced, they are both affecting, they're both layered. You actually do care about both of their arcs and plots, and despite the way they affect the plot, you care about them as well. You're not just saying, oh well, what will they do next, what's going to matter next. They have big plot importance, and those characters can be easy to draw in big strokes, so audiences know how to feel and think and react. But in this book, they're very well painted, I think. And finally, relationships. Something I think Bujold does consistently well is the relationships between her characters in all her stuff, I think. Different people like different things within that oeuvre, but she's always good at relationships, I think. Good at friendships, good at work relationships, good at romance. So Cazaril's devotion to the royal family and to the lady's maid is very well done. You are compelled by the motives that lead him to act as he does to protect and help them, even though they are very unusual to us perhaps at times. It catches you up in it. Saint Umagat, he's a fairly minor character who is sainted and has a blessing from one of the gods, and he looks after the magical royal menagerie. and his love of his animals and the way he interacts with them is really well done similarly. And it's very minor, but I remember it now. It's something I'm thinking, yeah, that was really good actually, I enjoyed that. And Bujold, she's definitely not writing chiefly romantic fantasy. I would say, I don't think many people would say she is, but she's not writing chiefly romantic fantasy. That genre, by the way, think Andre Norton, Mercedes Lackey, and Lindsay Buroker. She is very good at using the tropes of romantic fantasy. It's more true in Paladin of Souls and to a degree in the Penrick and Des books, but it's definitely true here that you can see there are tropes of the relationship building and daring do and interior life that kind of come up in romantic fantasy. So I think it's not as good as Paladin of Souls. I think Paladin of Souls is the best I've read by her. I'm going to be reading some Vorkosigan saga by her, but this is definitely a fantasy classic. It's something that I think if you really are into fantasy, really want to know about the last 30 or 40 years of fantasy and sci-fi, you should read this. If you've read it, tell me what you think in the comments. Until next time.